Who said bigger is always better? Let me introduce you to a small form factor ITX PC that not only looks the business, but plows through games like no tomorrow. The idea behind this was to create something that would be ideal for your desk, but wouldn't compromise on power or compatibility, and I am so pleased with how this has turned out. Now, today's video is kindly sponsored by NordVPN. Nord is a leading VPN service that allows you to browse privately and help protect your data. There's loads of great reasons to use a VPN, and I find it incredibly useful whenever I'm on an open Wi-Fi network and want to encrypt my traffic. There are thousands of servers across 62 countries, and they're all accessible from desktop and mobile apps. Check out NordVPN with my link below and get up to 77% off with code PCCentric. Now, our build begins as always with the processor, and is a bit tricky because there are so many viable options. I opted for a Ryzen chip here, and AMD sent out the Ryzen 5 2600. This 6-core processor has plenty of grunt for gaming, but it will easily hold its own in pretty much any application. Like the rest of the Ryzen range, it's fully overclockable too, so if you're wanting that little bit extra performance, it shouldn't be too difficult to muster. Due to our case size, of course, the motherboard for this rig needs to be ITX. Now, I first heard about the ROG X470i a couple of months ago, and swiftly asked Asus to send one out for this very machine. Now, of course, there's always a little compromise with smaller ITX motherboards, but here we've got dual M.2 slots, 4 SATA connections, AC Wi-Fi, and 2 RGB headers. It's all clearly laid out, and it allows for simple overclocking, and I have to say it was very easy to get this up and running. Now, things get very interesting when we look at the graphics card side of things, because if the rumours are true, we can maybe expect some new cards in a couple of months' time, so things may move very quickly. The one I'm using here is the original GTX 1080 Strix review card from over 2 years ago. The 1080 is a fantastic GPU, and as you'll see a little bit later, it crushes gaming at pretty much all resolutions and makes for a perfect gaming companion. The thing to remember is that you'll need a dual slot card for this particular case, and like so many cards, the now updated Asus Strix version won't actually fit in here properly. So please check this if you're going down the ITX route. Now, as for RAM, I wanted something that was relatively affordable and accessible, but something that was still quite bright and shiny. In this instance, it was ADATA that answered the call, and they provided 16GB of XPG Spectrix D41 DDR4. Its 2666 MHz speed isn't exactly the fastest around, but it should be more than we need for our gaming system. It is of course RGB too, and it's fully compatible with Aura, so we can actually synchronize this with our motherboard. Moving across to the storage front, we've got a mix of old and new, and once again I'm using the Samsung 970 EVO. Ever since Samsung dropped me the SSD at the start of the year, I've been loving its NVMe speed, and because it's part of the EVO range, it's actually somewhat affordable too. To be fair, it's not ideal for massive Steam libraries though, so you're probably going to want to grab a larger capacity hard drive too if you've been a victim of the Steam summer sale. Now, it was actually AMD that shipped out a Western Digital hard drive for this very purpose, and you're not only going to be able to store many huge games at the same time like Gears of War 4, but you're going to be able to enjoy the super fast boot times of Windows on that SSD. Now, to keep the temperatures of this PC under check, I asked Cooler Master to provide the Master Liquid ML120R RGB for the CPU. And with this, it's all about RGB, as the all-in-one solution has fully addressable RGB on both the fans and the pump. This allows for bolder effects, and thankfully it can be easily controlled via a header on the motherboard. I did, however, swap out the fans for some ARGB, as NZXT supplied these along with a case. Now, it is certainly quite a different look compared to others, but the benefit of using these with this case is that you can control both the fan speed and RGB via the CAM software without any additional hardware. Now, for the power supply, the usual applied. I want something that's very low noise, but of course has enough juice for our system. I actually ended up deconstructing an old Corsair build, and I took out the SF600. This was a perfect solution for this case, as its smaller size and modularity made cable management that much easier, while its 600 watt of power is more than we'll ever need. I did swap out the cables for a custom sleeved affair, but the updated version actually now has this as standard. But I will say that if you do go for a SFX power supply like this one, I would advise checking that the cable lengths are actually long enough to make sure they fit, so do this before buying. So those were all of the parts, but what about the build experience? Well, actually, very simple to put together. The case we're working with is the NZXT H200i, and oh my word, stop what you're doing, this is an attractive bit of kit. Seriously, just look at this for a second. It is simply stunning. It's also very easy to build in for an ITX case, which isn't something I say all of that often, but I do unfortunately have to say that it didn't go completely without issue, and it was mainly a cooling thing that caused a concern, as I was forced to fit the radiator at the front rather than the rear, which meant that clearance was, well, not quite good enough, and I was only able to fit in one fan at the front. If there wasn't a hard drive down there, I wouldn't really mind, to be honest, as it still looks very good, but this configuration probably isn't ideal for that drive. The fix for my issues would have actually been to get a shorter card and then a 240mm radiator, but bearing in mind the hardware I was working with, I have to say that realistically it turned out very nicely indeed. But okay, you build a PC, we get it. What about performance? I want to know how this thing performs. Well, in a word, stupendously. A fancy word for a fancy system, right? But you're probably after some numbers, and here it's very exciting news also, as this thing rocks productivity and gaming to a T. You can get pretty much anything done with 6 cores, and even at base clocks, it will give 4K video editing a great run for its money. If your business relies on CPU performance, then yes, a faster 8-core CPU is probably a better bet. But for everyone else, it's really hard to argue with the Ryzen 5. Move on to gaming though, and this is where things really start to heat up. Get it? Because the graphics card starts to... Anyway, the GTX 1080 still holds its own across the board, with PUBG, Fortnite and Battlefield all failing to topple this beast. At 1080p and 1440p, you'd actually be pretty happy running a high refresh rate monitor here, and while 4K performance isn't flawless, lower some of the settings and you can easily enjoy some smooth 60fps gameplay. The 1080 has indeed been around for a very long time, but even in its later days, it will still cut through the mustard like nobody's business. But even if all of that isn't good enough for you, then you'll be pleased to learn there's even more performance you can get from this machine. I am of course talking about overclocking, and it was very easy to get an automatic 4GHz overclock, but after playing around with some manual settings I got the system stable at 4.1 GHz while running 1.4 on the core voltage. Temperatures wise, this brought the CPU to around about 80 degrees after 3 minutes or 100% load, and talking about the performance, you can expect some decent games and CPU bound applications, so things like video editing, rendering, that sort of stuff. But in terms of gaming, you might see a boost at 1080p, maybe 1440p, but generally speaking, I wouldn't really expect miracles. The usual caveats of course do apply with overclocking, so be aware of the risks if you do choose to go down this route. Well then, here we are. I love this PC, I really do. If you're wanting something that's perhaps a bit more traditional, but you want that smaller size, or you want something that will go on your desk, I really think this well could be the answer for you. It should go without saying that this is as flexible as always, and you can easily swap out the CPU for a couple more or less cores if so desired, or you can throw in a cheaper graphics card to bring the price down a bit. I'm not always a huge fan of ITX to be honest, because there is often quite a lot of compromise, but here there is very little to complain about. If you do want to check out current pricing or check out any of the parts in more details, you can find links, as well of course to the link to NordVPN where you can save 77% off a subscription, down in that description below. This is genuinely the hottest this room has been. I think you're probably going to be able to tell if you're watching this in 4K, but I am not enjoying this right now. To say I want to leave is an understatement. But I hope you don't want to leave, but this is sadly the end of the video, so do get subscribed for more videos just like this. You can check out some PC builds in the top right hand corner, or of course the end screen. Let me know what you thought of this build down in the comment section below. Leave a like if you haven't done already, and a massive thank you to Asus ROG for sponsoring the channel as always, and everyone that provided the parts for this build. I think this means that I get to go. Thank you so much for watching, I'll see you in the next one.